when you're dissecting a dream, there are three things that you want to find. You want to find elements, and you want to find three different types of elements. The dream should have one focus. You could have multiple subfocuses. You could have multiple contextual details. There have been studies done to show that our brains have trouble holding any more than 7 details at one time in relationship to any one thing. So if there's one thing that you're thinking about, like your house, and you were trying to hold more than 7 details of your house in your head at one time and trying to think about all of them at once, process them, it gets really hard for your brain to process more than 7 details at a time. In theory, a lot of people that have done this a lot, the idea is usually that you want to try to limit yourself to about 7 details, about 7 elements. When you start getting above 7 elements, it starts getting really hard. If you're having one of those 3-hour dreams, and you know that your dream is going to be more than 7 elements, to see if there's a way that you can break it into like part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and start dissecting the parts and finding the elements of each individual part. And the elements may be the same in every part, but if you can look at it in smaller pieces, it'll help you break it apart. So focus is pretty easy, right? It's the primary element in the dream. Some of this, a lot of times, is just what do you mention the most. So if I had a dream about Alex, and I keep saying Alex was walking and Alex was running and Alex was driving a car and Alex, then the dream's probably external to me, and it's probably the focus around it is about Alex. If you're talking about I had a dream and the church was there and all the people were in the church and all the people from the church were doing this, they all got on a bus and then they all went to this park and then they all had dinner together. You're talking about that group of people. So the focus is probably the group of people. One general rule of thumb is if you can take the element out of the dream and the dream still exists, then that element is not the focus. If you take Aslan out of the Chronicles of Narnia, you just erase his character altogether. Those books don't exist anymore. You just got a book about a bunch of kids running around in some fairy tale land, right? The main idea of that book is just gone. Like you've just ripped out a very primary detail of that book. Or let's say you take the 4 kids out and you just have Aslan and the White Witch, right? You've just gotten rid of a huge focus, a point, and the story just falls apart. The beavers are leading no one through the woods. It doesn't stand up, right? Subfocus, elements that are not as important to the focus, but without them, the dream would be really different. The subfocus may be, I was driving my car on the wrong side of the interstate. So you're probably the focus of the dream because you're doing the action. One of the subfocus of the dream is probably your car. Because if that car didn't exist, or if that car was a bike, or if that car was a train, the dream would be extremely different. If there's an element that you know that if that element was to be different, or if that element was to be gone, the whole dream structure and everything about it would change. That's probably a subfocus. Usually they structurally assist in trying to hold the dream together. You have a dream and it's you're at your grandmother's house. That's an important detail, right? That detail that it's your grandmother's house. That could be a sub-focus because it helps hold the dream together. It's where you are. It's where the activity is happening at. It's where the interactions are occurring at, is within that house that is your grandmother's. Contextual details. They're not very significant to the structure of the dream, but they do help you decipher what more important symbols are. Contextual details, good way to tell. Especially in metaphor. I was talking about there's people, I've heard it quite often, driving a car from the back seat. A contextual detail would be you're in the back seat of the car. Probably not a subfocus. The car is probably the subfocus. But the fact that you're driving it from the back seat, that is something different about a car that stands out, right? That's something that you pay attention to. If you see an elephant and the elephant is pink, you may want to pay attention to the fact that the elephant is pink is a contextual detail, because most elephants aren't pink unless you're watching movies from Disney or having nightmares. If you see a giraffe and it's only a foot tall, the fact that the giraffe is only a foot tall is a contextual detail. Giraffe may be a subfocus, but the fact that it's only a foot tall, that's a detail about the giraffe. There's something about its character that has changed. And it adds to the interpretation, the meaning of the dream, but it's probably not something that's extremely weighty. The giraffe could still exist and not be a foot tall. It's things that stand out. If the grass is green, may not be a contextual detail of the dream, primarily because most grass is green. If the grass is pink, when you walk out of your house, you might want to make that a contextual detail of the dream. Some people say I was in a dream and I walked into my living room. And I walked in and there was a green couch and there was a brown table in the corner, and then the walls were beige and there was a auburn kind of rug in the middle of the room, and then there was a wooden chair off to the right, and you start asking questions like, well, what does your living room look like? Well, I have a green couch, and I have a wooden chair, and I have an auburn rug, and I have, beige walls. And it's like, well, those probably are not contextual details of the dream, because you're just seeing yourself in your living room. So you don't need to get wound up around like, why is the couch green and why is the carpet auburn? Like, it's that color because that's what color your living room is. So you dissect the dream, you get a summary of it, you dissect it. This is easy to do. A lot of people will use dream diagramming. There are different ways that you can diagram. I'm going to list them off real quick, and then we'll go through a couple. There's a bubble diagram. Yeah, focus, and then focus, and then you may have contextual detail, and contextual detail. So just an easy way to break it out and see it. You can look at it that way, and you can start seeing all the different parts, and then you can individually focus on each one individual part. Some of you that are a little bit more ordered, analytical, may like a list diagram where you do focus, subfocus, and you order it out this way, and you just do a list. Some of you may like to do that. Some of you may like to record your dream this way. The focus, subfocus, contextual details. As you're recording your dream, you may want to record it down that way. If you can think about it as you're recording it, the dream's pretty short. It'll help you pull out those details really quickly. So what does the dream revolve around? What does the activity and the emotional weight of the dream revolve around? That's probably the focus. If you hear yourself saying I, me, my a lot when you're talking about the dream or when you're thinking about the dream, probably the focus. The road may be a subfocus. You may be driving to the road of your house, but that road is different. It's paved instead of gravel. The fact that it's different. It's normally gravel, but it's paved. That would be a contextual detail. Why is it paved, but in reality it's gravel? Could be a subfocus, could be contextual detail. If the person is adding weight to the dream, if they're adding any kind of weight, emotional impact to the dream, they're probably a subfocus. If you can take them out of the dream and it doesn't really impact the details of the dream at all, like they're just in the car, they're there, but they're not doing anything, then it may just be a contextual detail. I had a car full of people, but I didn't know who any of the people were. I'm in a car with my dad, and I'm very well aware that it's my dad, and there's an emotional connection to the fact that it's my dad in a car with me. That's probably a subfocus. Tree structure. So you could do like focus, and then you break it out with the focus. Then you break this out to contextual details. You can also do that sideways, right? However you see things, whatever works best for you. If you like little pretty bubbles, you can do that. If you like, to draw trees, you can do that. You can be like Bob Ross, pretty little tree here. Artistic diagrams. Some of you may like to draw pictures. My artistic diagrams are not very artistic. I draw things out for my kids sometimes. They love my... Or with an artistic diagram, you're literally doing that. You're drawing a scene of the dream. If you see yourself again riding in a car with your dad, draw a car. Draw yourself in the driver's seat. Draw something that represents your dad in the passenger seat. You can start to write subfocuses like my car. You can like highlight it, like a little note off of it, my car or my dad's car. You could say my car is normally gray, but in the dream, for some reason, my car was orange. That would probably be a contextual detail. Just make a little line off of it. Contextual detail, car was orange. There are people that are very artistic that they've realized when they're doing this dream diagramming and they're drawing pictures of it, they will remember more details of their dream. A lot of dreams happen in right brain, because it's where a lot of imagination and creativity and stuff like that occurs at. And so if you can do something artistic as you're doing it, sometimes it will pull elements out that you've forgotten because you're re-engaging right brain. Sometimes when you're doing focus and subfocus, maybe don't write in black the whole time. Maybe make the subfocus red, make the primary focus blue, make the contextual details green. Just anything you can do to spur yourself to start adding weight and kind of practicing discernment by making it red. I'm discerning that this is a subfocus. You may go back and look at it later and be like, oh, that shouldn't be red at all. That should be a green subfocus or a contextual detail. But anything you can do like that. Let's say that you've had a dream about a football field. You could write the dream in a way that looks like a football field. Like if you're just documenting the dream you had, writing it down at night, you can start writing the dream down this way and then start writing this way. and draw the outline of the field. And then as you're writing down the rest of your dream, you could start writing your dream out into the shape of a football field or something like that. And by doing that, sometimes, again, you're engaging creativity. So if you're documenting your dream, you're writing it in a journal, you could write it out into the shape of something you saw in a dream, and sometimes that'll help you remember detail. It's interesting. The Jewish culture believes that your day starts at night when you're going to sleep. So they believe that as they lay down, they're starting their day. With dreams, that's extremely important. If you are going to bed to start your day, then as you lay down expecting to have a dream, if you think about it, they say we're supposed to get 8 hours of sleep a night. I don't know many people that get 8 hours of sleep a night, especially after kids. That seems to, even if you did get 8 hours, that goes way, way down. But let's just say in this fantasy world, you get 8 hours of sleep a night, right? You are sleeping a third of your life. So you could spend a third of your life in a dream state. That's a lot of time for God to give you revelation about stuff. That's a whole lot of time for things to occur. There was a lady one time that she had a dream. Her kid had went off to prom, and she had a dream while they were gone. And in her dream, she kept seeing a car accident, her kid's car in this accident. So in her dream, she got into some aspect of lucidity, and she was actually going into the dream, and she kept going in and manipulating aspects of the dream and moving cars in different ways. She finally moved the car, I think it was 3 feet to the left in the dream. And when she got woken up by a call, and they said, your son was just in a car accident. And when she got there, they told her if the car hadn't been moved 3 feet to the left, like they would have never lived through it. In the dream, she's physically interceding and affecting something that's affecting natural world. So absolutely things like that happen. And we're going to do something before we talk about it up here. And I want you to ask God for a metaphor for the person that you were paired up with. You have to ask for understanding of the metaphor. If you feel like you understand what the metaphor is, by all means, feel free to share it. But you are just asking for a metaphor. So you could see a picture of them. They look like a daisy with the petals around their head. You could have God say, she's like a honeybee. I wanted to mention in this, if your head hurts in this process of like thinking about things, you're essentially training your brain to think in a new way. Most of us have not been trained our whole life to think about things like this. We've not been trained to think about metaphor and all these weird meanings of things and how something is different than what I see right in front of me. We're most of the time taught that what you see is what it is, right? What you can see, taste, touch, feel, that's what something is. So this idea of like dreams and interpretation and metaphor and symbolism and all this stuff, it's new information. It's new stuff that our minds is trying to process. So it's not uncommon for people when they get into this to walk away and they're just be extremely mentally fatigued. Even now, I'll probably go home and sleep till tomorrow sometime. I haven't talked about this stuff a lot lately. I do a lot of dream interpretation. If I have a lot of people come over to me, I go home and I'm just wiped out just because my mind is working in a way that it's not every day working in. It's kind of taxing sometimes to try to think about that and process things in that way. All right, I'm going to talk about metaphor a little bit, and then we're going to do some diagramming together real quick. Metaphor, as we said, it's a symbol. It's something that you see that has a different meaning than what you're seeing. Context with metaphor is extremely important. You can even see that just within scripture. Let's take fire, for instance. Fire sometimes has to do with judgment. Fire sometimes has to do with destruction. Fire can sometimes be purification. The context of how you see the element is extremely important. You can't just always say a dog is this, a cat is that. Context, you cannot interpret a dream or an element outside of context. People come up quite frequently, well, what does this mean in a dream? And it's like, I don't know what's happening in a dream. And they're like, well, I just want to know what it means. Well, and I'll list out about 15 things it can mean. Like, it could be any of these things. And it could be something that I didn't even list out. So context is really, really important. Getting people to share their dream with you, and how we talked about summarizing it. It's really important when someone shares their dream with you to try to summarize the dream back to them. What you're doing in doing that is you're doing what Daniel did. He pulled out the leading parts. He ordered the heaviest elements, and he summarized that back to them. Sometimes somebody will share a dream with me that takes them about 15 minutes. And I will summarize it back to them in like a minute. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's what the dream is. Because if you pull out the leading parts and get rid of all the other contextual detail, you realize that there's only a small part that you really need to focus on. Water, again, for instance, in John 4:13, Jesus is talking to the lady at the well, and he says, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him shall never be thirsty. But the water I give will become in him a fountain of water springing up in eternal life. He's talking about spiritual water. He's talking about, I'll give you something of the Spirit that'll last forever. He's talking to the Pharisee, and he's telling him, you have to be born of water and Spirit, right? How do you do that? How do you get born again? Jesus isn't talking about the water in the relationship to Spirit at that point. He's talking about to a water birth. It's more of a literal. Context is really important. He's talking about birthing in that moment. Sometimes water could just literally be mystery, because if you were to look at the ocean, all you can see is the surface of it. You can't see what's happening underneath it. So sometimes when you're standing in a body of water and you see a giant body of water, it can be mystery, because all you can see is what's happening at a surface level. You can't see the depths, and the mystery is unraveled in the depths of things. Context is really important. As we talked about a little bit with contextual details, what stands out about the element, what stands out about the symbol that you're looking at. Is it something completely different than what it is naturally? If you're looking at the sun and it's yellow, well, the sun's always yellow. But if it's extremely yellow and you just can't take your eyes off of it, that's probably something you need to pay attention to. Your dad's there in your dream, and the last time you saw him, he was 80, but in your dream, he looks like he's 30. That contextual detail of his age is probably really important, because it's not who he is literally. You're seeing him, and so he's probably a metaphor. He's a symbol of something else. The contextual details draws aspects of what he could be represent in the dream. Yeah, I had a dream. The one most recent was that went into my grandmother's house, and she's no more alive. And there was a man in the floor, and he was sitting in the floor, and he had his feet crossed, and there were kids all over the place, which wasn't weird for my grandmother's house, but there were kids everywhere. And all these kids were just sitting around listening to this guy talk. And so I laid down on the ground at his feet, and Jim Driscoll, some of y'all know, he came in and he laid across my back, like this way across my back. And when he did, I saw a door in the sky just fall and open up, and I saw a bunch of stuff happening through the door. And it's like I shook myself and kind of brought myself out of it. And Jim stood up in the dream, and I went into the kitchen, and my grandmother was in there, and she was like in her 30s, 40s, and she's just laughing the whole time. And she's just messing around with all these kids. And I walked in the kitchen, and she turned around, handed a box to me and said, you need to take this to your mom. It's something that she needs. There's something that's it's probably her in the dream. And there's probably something generational that she was giving to me that I need to pass to my mom, something that mom needed. But I could also have a dream, like you said, with your dad. Your dad's in the car, driving the car. It could have to do with a generational issue, and your dad's driving it and you're riding in it. And it's something that's affecting your life. It's moving it from one place to another. Or he could be God in the dream, and he's a picture of a father for you, driving something that's moving you from one place to another. In that dream, I knew my grandmother was my grandmother. I just knew it when I came out of it. I had a dream in Macedonia one time that my dad died. When we went to Macedonia, I went to lay down and take a nap, and I woke up crying. My pillow was wet, and my dad had died, and I was late getting to his funeral. And I was running up the hill trying to get to his funeral, and there were different people that kept stepping out in front of me trying to hug me, and I kept running past them. And I got to the top of the hill, and you were standing there with your arms open, and I ran in and you just hugged me. And I was standing there at Dad's grave, and he was already been buried. When I woke up, I knew God was telling me I was being birthed into a new spiritual birth, and that things that were natural were dying away. So in the dream, you weren't yourself. Like, you weren't giving me new DNA, but you were a picture of a spiritual father, and my DNA was changing from what it had been naturally to a new spiritual line. Yeah, so she's asking, like, when I had a dream about my grandmother, did I feel like it was like the cloud of witnesses, that she was there from the cloud of witnesses interacting, and it wasn't just like a symbol of her, because she's felt some of that in the past? Absolutely, it can be, because when people die, right, they're not really gone. They're just existing in another place. They don't exist here with us anymore, but they exist in another place. They're still there. It talks about the cloud of witnesses cheering us on. So there's a great cloud of witnesses, and you can interact with them. They can come back and interact with you in your sleep. Sometimes they show up in dreams. Sometimes they show up outside of dreams. Yeah, and sometimes people will show up that had some kind of a major ministry, and it may not even be anybody you ever had an interaction with, and they'll show up in your dream. It could be that person if they've died. It could be the God sending them back from the cloud of witnesses, and it could be something that they carried. You could have a dream about Smith Wigglesworth, and you may not be interacting with Smith Wigglesworth in your dream. You may be interacting with a gift of healing. And because you know Smith Wigglesworth's ministry, and even though he's not around anymore, but you know what he carried. The dream could be talking about something about you stepping into a ministry of healing. The safe place is always be pursuing God. So there are people that go and try to divine the dead, right? We even see that in scripture. They go and they call Samuel back, and he's like, why did you pull me back? So yeah, there's absolutely, but it's really the baseline, the heart of what are you doing? Are you pursuing God? And if you're pursuing God and he brings somebody from the cloud of witnesses to interact with you, that's something he did. If you're pursuing that person outside of God, then yeah, you can conjure things to happen, and things can even show up to look like a person and just be completely deceptive. Spirits can show up to appear in the form of people to deceive you that they are something that they're not. But if your heart is that you're pursuing God, and then you've got to use discernment, God brings them to interact with you, that's great. Like I wasn't asking God, I want to interact with my grandmother because I think there's something my mom needs. Like it just randomly happened. But there's lots of stories of people interacting with different people in dreams. There's lots of stories about people interacting with doctors, and they'll talk about how they're so in love with this doctor, and and they'll wake up feeling like there's like adultery in their heart, and they need to go tell their husband, I woke up and I was so in love with this doctor, and I've got something I've entertained in my heart. Well, no, you've probably interacted with a great physician, and you're incredibly in love with him because you saw him and your heart's just drawn to him. You always have to use discernment. So with metaphor, you want to identify the symbol. Does it seem significant, or does it just fit nicely within the background of the dream? Is it worth giving any attention to? I woke up and I'm in my dream and I see a white 4Runner parked in front of my house. Probably not worth paying attention to, because in the natural, a white 4Runner is parked in front of my house every day. There's nothing odd about that. Is it something that feels like there's weight, there's emotional impact? Is something that you need to focus on? Through discernment and context, decide if the element is primarily literal or metaphoric. Metaphoric symbols will often seem out of place. They will be actively used, but sometimes out of context in which they are normally used. So maybe you're on the interstate riding a bicycle, not usually where you see somebody riding a bicycle out on the interstate, something that you may want to pay attention to. Maybe you're hammering nails in with a book. Not something you use a book for. It's something that you probably need to pay attention to. Why am I using a book in this manner? And so the manner that you're using it, the activity you're using it in, will probably have to do with the meaning of why you're holding a book. If the symbol is not out of place, it doesn't mean that it's literal, but it makes it more likely that it's not an essential element that you need to interpret. So I have 2 cats in the yard. If I have a dream about having 2 cats outside, probably not something I need to pay attention to. Doesn't mean that it couldn't be a metaphor or something, but it may not be something I need to put a whole lot of weight on. Unless the fact is that I'm seeing those cats and they're much larger than they used to be, then, I probably need to pay attention to that. Or if I'm just really drawn to the cats and interacting with them, or if they're talking to me, then I may need to pay attention to it. Ask yourself, am I confused by why this is here, why it's in the dream? You're going to the doctor, you have some sickness or whatever, and all of a sudden you walk into a restaurant and you're going into the restaurant to be healed from the sickness that you have. Good idea to ask, why am I in a restaurant, not a hospital? Why am I here and not there? I'm in an airport and I'm going to Roanoke. Well, why are you in an airport to travel to Roanoke? Why would that be significant that you're in an airport and getting ready to travel to Roanoke? Because that's completely out of context for how you would get to Roanoke. Ask yourself, if you're in a dream, why am I in a train station? Why am I not in an airport? Why am I in a bus station? How's a bus station different than an airport? Compare some of those aspects against each other. What would a bus represent versus a plane? Weigh some of those things out and start to weigh them in discernment. Look at some of the ways that they're used, the purpose of them, and it'll give you some of the idea of what the metaphor is about. If you can't find a metaphor for it, does using the literal meaning of the element add to the understanding of the dream? If you're trying to find some kind of metaphoric meaning and you just can't figure out what the metaphor would be, ask yourself, is this something literal? Am I trying to make this mean something that it doesn't mean, and I just need to let it be what it is? Pole in the middle of the room, if I have a dream and I see that pole, do I just need to let the pole be the pole and stop trying to find some kind of metaphorical understanding for it that just doesn't seem like it fits? And sometimes you will do that as you're interpreting a dream, or someone's interpreting a dream for you. They'll say, oh, it was blue because of this, and something in you just feel this, like, you watch those old game shows and they have like the buzzers when you get the wrong answer. It's like, and they're like, oh, it's blue because, and you're like, and let's go. No, that's not it. That's probably discernment telling you that's not what that is. Just give weight to it. Doesn't mean that it's not a metaphor, but maybe somebody just added the wrong understanding to it. Choose which of the following metaphoric meanings you want to apply. Metaphoric meanings, there's a few different bases that you can usually go into. So you can look at the biblical meaning. There's lots of metaphor that you can find in Scripture. course, sheep, fish, the Lion of Judah, again, the tree of life. You may see a tree, you know, it's a tree of life. What is a metaphor for that? You may see a cross, you may see a fish symbol. Is there any kind of biblical meaning that I can go find? You know, you may see stars in the sky, and you know that those stars aren't actual stars. Maybe it's God talking to you about something about the heavenly host and angels. Talks about how the dragon wiped a third of the stars out of the sky. A good idea to go look. There's lots of metaphor in Bible. If you can find it in Bible, does the biblical metaphor, does it fit? Sometimes it's just absolute pure revelation. You don't know why something means what it means. You just know that it means it. You were driving this car. I know what this car means. This car has to do with your job. I don't know why, but I just know that it has to do with your job. Something that God's just in that moment, he's just clearly saying to you, like, this is the person, this is what this metaphor has. This is what this metaphor means. It can come that way, right? God just opens up your mind and you're like, oh, I all of a sudden know this. It could be to do with a natural function. Maybe you see a room full of elephants and there's a mouse in the room, right? What's the mouse's natural function? Like, does it have any natural function? What's the natural function of an elephant? You know, what are characteristics around it? If you're holding a gun in your hand, what's a natural function of a gun? Why would you have a gun? You know, sometimes those natural functions will speak to metaphor. If you see yourself in a dream shooting things around your house, it may not mean that you're homicidal. It could mean that you're stepping into warfare and protecting your house. You're protecting your property, and you're doing warfare beyond what you can reach. You're doing warfare with things that are beyond what you can reach out and touch. Personal meanings. I like to use the example of dogs with this a lot. Everybody says the dogs are friends. My younger sister, Jocelyn, when we were kids, we got this random dog, a white dog, and he was very playful, and he rolled her around in the yard. One of the first days we had her, and she was scared to death. So if she would have had a dream and she said, I had this dog in my dream. And so they said, oh, that's your friend. And she would have said, I don't want that friend. I don't want anything to do with that friend, because the last time that friend rolled me around in the yard. But if she saw that white dog in a dream, it would have a personal meaning to her. I could be trying to give her some kind of metaphoric meaning. That's a personal meaning for her. It's something that's very personal. It's something that she understands. It had some impact on her life. And so she knows exactly what that dog means to her. Cultural meanings. If somebody says you're yellow, what does that probably have to do with? You're fearful, right? You ever heard somebody say, well, you're yellow-bellied? You're yellow, you're full of fear. Or somebody says, I see red. Somebody says, I see red. What does that mean? You're angry. Like, that's a cultural thing. We understand that if somebody's saying, I see red, culturally, we understand that means that they're dealing with anger. If they're walking around in a dream and everything they're looking at looks red, or everybody they see is appearing red to them, maybe you're dealing with some anger towards some people. You're seeing everybody through anger. Again, cultural understanding. What is a dog to most people? Man's best friend, right? We have a dog and everybody's seeing a dog. So dog's usually man's best friend. You see a dog, most of the time people are going to say it's a friend. Let's go back to biblical meanings for a second. Let's say you see a snake in a dream. Anybody want to take a guess at what a snake in a dream would mean? Yes, deception, lies. About 99.9% of the time, a snake is going to be a lie, some kind of deception. A snake could also be wisdom sometimes, because Aaron's rod was a snake, right? Or Moses' staff was a snake, and he threw it on the ground, and it turned into a snake. And the serpents, the Pharaoh's wise men did the same thing. They threw theirs down on the ground, and they turned into snakes. But then the one that Moses threw down ate all the other snakes, and he picked it back up, right? It tested the lies, and it came out as truth. It tested the lies of what they were doing, the deception of what they're doing, and he showed truth. And so it became wisdom. So sometimes deceptions that are tested can become wisdom for you. 99.9% of the time, snakes are going to be lies. You don't want to block yourself off in your mind with anything that has to do with metaphors, that this is always that. You want to be open to God expanding something beyond you and what you could think. A vehicle usually has to do with anything that takes you from one place to another, something you're moving in. It could be an occupation, it could be a ministry, it could be a family relationship, like a family activity that's moving you from one place to another. It's something that you start in one location and you end up in another location. A lot of people say if you're in a car, then it's a dream about your ministry. That's not always the case. Are there highlighted attributes? Again, we've talked about some of that, right? If there's a giraffe and it's 1 foot tall, that's a highlighted attribute of the giraffe, right? Its height is very highlighted. If you see a door to your house and your door to your house is normally painted blue, but the blue is so bright, like it's just shining and it's just covering up any other color that's in the dream, you probably need to pay attention to the highlighted attribute of that door. There's something very specific about it to weigh that out and figure out why is that standing out the way that it is. And sometimes it's just your best guess. I have no idea what this is, but I think it might be that. That's absolutely valid sometimes. As long as you preface that with, I don't know what this is, but it may be this, and just throw it out there. And then just be sure that you let people know you need to go weigh this out, discern, figure out if this is what this is or not. But sometimes that just happens. It's just you don't see it. Does your understanding of the metaphor, does it change the dream? Does it reinforce the existing meaning of what you think the dream means? Does it increase your understanding? And what's the main effect that it has on the dream? Some of that is important. It helps you find some of those focuses and subfocuses, right? If it changes the dream, then it's probably some kind of at least a subfocus. Does it reinforce the existing meaning of the dream? If you change that metaphor and it changes the meaning of the dream, then there's a lot of weight around that metaphor, right? Something you need to pay attention to. In Luke, it says, "So I say to you, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it'll be open to you." So sometimes the metaphors won't come immediately. You have to search them out. But if you search for something, you will find it, right? He says, if you seek, you will find. So if you search for something, you'll find it. It may take time, but that's, again, kingly action. That's a very royal response to something. You search it out. These are some of the more common things that you'll see in a dream. And I'm going to talk about possibilities of what they could be. I will preface this that if you make a list of these and you go home and you say buildings are this and cars are that, and you use this to interpret dreams, you're probably going to interpret dreams wrong at some point down the road. This is just common things, most common ways that these show up in dreams. I'm just giving you this so that you have a starting point, because it's good to have some kind of a starting point that you're using faith against something or faith towards something. God, I think it could have to do with this. A lot of times I've heard that it could be this. Is this what it is in this dream? And so you're just weighing that out, right? Buildings, they usually tend to represent whatever they contain. So a fire station would represent something to do with fire, right? A house is where life happens at. Most of the time, a house represents life. It could also represent church because it's a house, right? It's family. Transportation is anything that takes you from one place to another. It gets you to your destination. It could be an occupation, could be activities that you're involved in, but it's anything that's moving you from one place to another. There's lots of teachers that have dreams about driving school buses. Why are they driving school buses? They may not even be teachers in the natural sense, like as an occupation. They may be somebody who does a lot of teaching in a spiritual sense, in a church setting, and they'll see themselves driving school buses a lot. Why would it be a school bus? It's because it picks you up at one place and it drops you off another. Well, why is it a school bus and not a charter bus? Because school has to do with teaching and educating. You're driving a school bus because you're educating people. You're picking them up at one level of understanding and you're dropping them off at another level of understanding. Why would you be driving a truck and not a car? If you normally have a car, but you keep seeing yourself driving pickup trucks, you could be trying to pick something up and move it to another place. You could have a call in your life to haul things, to carry weights. So you need a truck to put things in, to store, to haul things in. Ask yourself some of those questions. But transportation is just literally something that's getting you from one place to another. If you're on a motorcycle, you're by yourself. You can't have anybody with you. You're on a journey that you're all alone on your journey. You're in an individual journey in it, right? Unless there's a sidecar. So then people, who are the people to you? What have they done in your life? Have they made an impact in your life in some way? What does their name mean? Or what's their position or role? Do they have some inherent job that you know about? Names are really important, right? God renamed Abram to Abraham, and it had a very specific meaning. He called him father of many nations. He changed Saul's name to Paul. Paul meant little. So every time that somebody said Paul, they were calling him little, right? And he said that God's put a thorn in my side to humble me. God kept reminding him how little he was every time somebody said his name. So there could be something very specific about the name that you need to pay attention to. Peter, he changed his name to Peter, which is rock. So you could have somebody in your dream, and I had somebody in my dream and they were named Peter. I don't know why, but God kept saying I needed to go with Peter. You need to come to the rock. So it may not be somebody that you know. It could be somebody that you know, and what impact did they have on your life? Like I told you about the dream with Rick. At that point in time, Rick was mentoring me spiritually. He was teaching, he was feeding into my life a ton. So I had a dream my dad was dying, and I ran up and Rick was standing there on the hill. It was the impact that he was having on my life, the role that he played in my life in that moment. That's what the metaphor was about with Rick in that moment. It didn't mean that my dad was going to die and I was going to run up the hill and find Rick. He was a metaphoric picture of something for me. Animals and creatures usually has to do with the attributes of the animal. Could have to do with the size, the characteristic. Winged creatures usually have to do with spiritual beings. good or bad. If you see a bunch of crows, ravens, they usually don't carry a good connotation. If you're seeing a bunch of vultures, they naturally eat dead stuff. Probably not a good thing. If you're seeing doves, what do we know about doves from Scripture? Jesus. It's the picture of the Holy Spirit coming down, right? Eagles, lots of times, get represented as people that are operating in prophetic because they can see so far away and they can see very small detail at a very far distance. So they see things from a very high altitude. So lots of times when you see things with the eagles, it's talking about some kind of prophetic aspect. Birds of prey could be good or bad. Could be something hunting you. Could be something hunting prey around your life. Predatory animals, lions, tigers, snakes, any kind of parasitic animals, usually not good. It usually has some kind of a very negative aspect, very demonic aspect. There is a Lion of Judah, so you can't always say that it is negative, but most of the time a predatory animal is not going to be a good thing for the most part. Anybody want to take a guess as to what a mouse or a rat would mean? What attracts mice and rats? Crumbs, garbage, food, things that have been left out. So if you see your house and it's full of mice and rats, you may have had some trash that you've left sitting around inside your house in your life. You've let your life get unclean. And so mice and rats are being attracted to it because that's their natural characteristic. Objects, they usually represent their function and something related to their purpose or cultural value given to them. So weapons right now, like guns, that's a very highly talked about subject as far as culture goes right at this moment, right? Some people say it's always about death. Some people say it's about protection. It could have a very cultural kind of an aspect on it. It could have to do very personally for you what it does. I have guns that have been passed down to me from my grandfathers that were there. You know, we have a gun at the house that is a Kentucky long rifle. I have no idea how old it is. It's been passed down through Lee's family from generation to generation to generation. We assume it's pre-Civil War, and if we saw it in a dream, it would have a very personal meaning to me. Most weapons are there for causing harm, for defending, or for attacking. Again, can have a picture of spiritual warfare. Why a gun and not a knife? A knife you can only attack within the area that you can reach. A gun, you're reaching out beyond yourself. Why a dagger and not a sword? If you have a sword, it reaches further than a knife will. Clothing often has to do with what you're equipped to do. If you see yourself in nurse's scrubs, it probably speaks something very clearly about what you're equipped to do in that moment. If you see yourself in like overalls and you're all covered with mud, you know, there's probably some things you're about to do to get your hands dirty. What are you equipped to do? If you're in a wedding dress and you're wearing military boots, you may want to pay attention to why do you have military boots on. There may be something very specific talking about what you're getting ready to walk into. Right. And then parts and pieces of objects can usually have to do with the meaning of how they function into the whole. So let's say you see a bike tire. That bike tire could have to do with the representation, not just the tire itself, but how that tire affects the whole of the bike. Without the tire, the bike goes nowhere. So you could just see a tire and realize that you have tires that you could possibly move on, but you're not going to be able to steer it or power it anyway. So it may have to do with what the picture of that means as a whole. Body parts, for instance, your legs usually have to do with your spiritual walk. Feet don't usually have to do with walk. Feet usually have to do with peace because you've shod your feet in the gospel of peace. Your head usually has to do with leadership. It's the beginning of things. Your fingers, for instance, can have representation. And I did this with the worship team recently. Lots of times the thumb has to do with the apostolic because it most easily touches every other part. It interacts with every part the easiest. The pointer finger usually has to do with prophetic because it's pointing things out. It's giving direction. The middle finger usually has to do with evangelism because it reaches the furthest. And interestingly enough, it can be used as counter evangelism. Can be used to counter evangelism. It can push people away if it's used incorrectly. The ring finger usually has to do with the pastor because they're married to the church. The pinky finger usually has to do with the teacher, and it's not because they're the most insignificant or the smallest. If you were to have something in your hand and wrap your hand around it, if you don't have a pinky, it is very easy for somebody to open your fist and take what you have in your hand out of your hand. If you can wrap your pinky around it, you can hold on to it much tighter than if you don't have your pinky. Have you ever tried to swing a hammer not using your pinky? It just flops all over the place. You can't get hardly any force on it at all. But if you wrap your pinky around it and get a good grip on it, you can get force behind it. So the teacher helps us to hold on to things, to grasp things, to make them firm. A question to ask around metaphors. What would be natural to you and what's enhanced or different? What breaks the traditional rules of physics and so on? I'm driving my car, but I'm flying over the city. as I'm driving my car. That's not the way that a car is intended to be used. So you would want to ask yourself, yes, I'm in a car, but why is it flying? The fact that it's flying is probably pretty important to understand what the metaphor means. Weather systems, they can be positive and they can be negative. They could also be literal. I was in Big Stone Gap one time doing a prophetic conference for a weekend, and I'm off in the corner first night and they're doing worship and I'm just over there praying and I keep seeing a tornado. And so I came back and I said, I think there's going to be some change that's going to happen here and God's going to shift some things around. I went home the next Monday. My sister called me that afternoon. She was still living down there, my younger sister, Jocelyn. She called. She said, hey, a tornado just touched down in Big Stone and just tore up about 4 blocks. I had no idea what I was seeing. Could be literal, could be metaphoric, could be devastation, but it all has to do with the feel of the storm. Not every tornado you see is going to be negative. What took Elijah to heaven, right? That was not a negative tornado. Not every tsunami you see is going to be negative. It could be God is wiping things out and giving it a clean start. There's going to be some trash to clean up, but God may be coming and wiping things out and he's going to start over. He's going to start clean. You have to really use discernment. How does it feel? Am I afraid of this storm? Does the storm feel foreboding? Is it black and I see red eyes inside the tornado? Well, that's probably not good. Is the tornado blue and I feel like I'm drawn to go stand in the middle of the tornado? Well, maybe that's okay. But, there are some things that you'll see a lot that'll be common symbols to you. But the context of where you see them at, is it in a family event? Is it around family? Is it around people that I know? They're massive. They're hard to miss. They're loud. They cause lots of destruction. So it could be demonic, it could be attacks, it could be spiritual stuff that's going on. Colors usually affect context. They shade what everything else means that can add particular meaning to something that is specifically colored. Colors usually will not be a focus. It'll usually be a context to something. What color it is. If it's the natural color, it may not be important. If it's an odd color, then pay attention. If it's an extremely obvious color that's bright, you want to pay attention to it. We talked about false dreams and how false dreams are very muted, like negative dreams, negative source dreams. They're very muted. They're either black and white. The colors are very muted. They're grays. They're beiges. They're just off colors. They just don't feel right. It's red, but there's just something weird about it. It's not the normal color of red. When you see stuff like that, it's usually coming from some kind of a negative source. White light usually has to do with holiness. White, you see that in Scripture. Being given white robes, the white doves, the Holy Spirit comes down and lands on Jesus. White is interesting because white is composed of all the colors of light. When you take all the colors of light and you put them all together and it's reflected back to you, you see that as white. It has every color in it. You hold a prism in front of light, what happens? It diffracts the color, right? And it pulls all the different wavelengths of color out because of the way the prism interacts with the light. And so each different wavelength comes out and it looks like something different. That's why we see rainbows, because there's moisture in the air and light's coming through the moisture. And when it comes through the moisture, the light gets diffracted and it turns into different colors because it breaks up the wavelength of the light. It's interesting in relationship to the 7 spirits of God. White would be the Spirit of the Lord. Red would be wisdom. Orange would be understanding. Yellow would be counsel. Green would be strength. Blue would be knowledge. Purple would be the spirit of the fear of the Lord. It's very interesting, too, that purple is the smallest wavelength. It's the easiest one to be diffracted and not be seen. It has to have the most intense light for purple to show up. So in the most intense aspect of the presence of the Lord coming, the fear of the Lord is almost always present. When the presence of God comes and it's intense and it's just heavy and weighty, the fear of the Lord is almost always present in that moment. Interesting how color works like that. Based on, if you just want to look at it in relationship to 7 spirits of God, it would be counsel. Purple would be the spirit of the fear of the Lord. Purple can be royalty. Purple can be intercession. This is not like overall. This is just in relationship to the seven spirits, because it's something I've been looking at lately. White would be the spirit of the Lord. Red would be wisdom. Orange would be understanding. Yellow would be counsel. The Roy G. Biv. If you look at Isaiah 11, you can just take the 7 spirits and just line them to Roy G. Biv. Numbers tend to be supportive to the elements again, kind of like color. They tend to add context, usually not a focus or a subfocus. The baker and the butler. The numbers are very important. 3 baskets of bread, 3 groups of grapes, had to do with 3 days. The numbers are very important to Pharaoh, weren't the focus of the dream, but they added context. 7 years. In 7 years, this is going to happen. You're going to have 7 years of good, 7 years of bad. I could give a guess. It doesn't take years for baskets of bread to be made, but it takes years for cows to get to the size that they're ready to be harvested. Wheat doesn't take a day. Wheat takes a year to get, a full cycle. Spiritual beings, you can see God, angelic spirits. You can interact with people, as we've already talked about. You can interact with demonic spirits. I had a reoccurring dream from the time that I was very young. Mom said that I was 3, and I used to tell her about the clown-faced man and the man in black. They would come to me in my dreams, the clown-faced man and the man in black. They would show up and they would chase me in my dreams quite often, once a month at least, if not weekly. It happened until I was in my 20s. In my dream, one day I was getting out of my car and I knew that they were coming for me. And they jumped on my back and I grabbed them and pulled them over my shoulder and I put them on the ground and put my knee in their chest and I just started pounding on them. And I never had the dream again after that. So demonic things can absolutely come in your dreams. They usually come to cause fear. They come to freeze you, to paralyze you, to pull you away and push you away from spiritual activity and spiritual things you could experience. I want to talk about source of dreams real quick and then talk about some of these dream categories. There's multiple examples of dreams coming from God in Scripture. Most of the time, if God gives us a dream, the elements are going to be outside of our understanding or outside of our scope of thought. Again, it says his thoughts are higher than ours, his ways are deeper than ours. The things that he's doing are going to be beyond us. They should give you some form of new revelation, not simply just repeat something that you already knew. In most cases, interpretations of dreams from God will be profound and will add some kind of excitement to your life. It'll feel like they carry some kind of a great weight. You'll have some kind of experience, some kind of great weight and understanding what the meaning of them are. Dreams can come from ourselves. In Jeremiah 23:32, it says, I am against those who have prophesied false dreams and reported them and led my people astray by their lies and reckless boasting. Yet I did not send them or command them, nor do they provide this people the slightest benefit. They're making up dreams and giving them because those dreams give more weight to what they say. They say, I had a dream, and then they'll say it, and people then pay attention. Jeremiah 29, for this is what the Lord of armies, the God of Israel, says, do not let your prophets who are in your midst or your diviners deceive you. Do not listen to their interpretation of your dreams, which you dream. And when it says which you dream, what that literally means there is dreams that you've caused yourself to dream. So we can literally cause ourselves to dream things. If you lay down and you are anxious and worried about something, you could absolutely have a dream about it. That dream is not coming from God. That dream could be coming from yourself because your mind is so actively revolved around it that you're causing yourself to dream about something. Visions, it can absolutely happen. Most of the time with dreams, what you'll see, people come and they say, like, I had this dream and I was driving this car and, they give you all these details and you're like, well, what do you think it means? And they're like, I'm supposed to marry this girl I met. And it's like, well, no, that's not at all what the dream is. Like every dream that they have all of a sudden means that they're supposed to get married to somebody. But you can cause yourself to have dreams too. You could want to get married so bad that every dream you end up having has to do with you getting married. And you could be like, well, God's telling me to get married. And it's like, well, no, that's all you think about. You've set this up inside of yourself. So like you said in Ezekiel, you've put this idol before yourself. So Revelation keeps coming back to that thing. The things that you're afraid of and things. So what you focus on, you make room for. Tell my son a lot. Like when he was playing baseball, before the game, he would come in and he would say, like, I'm gonna have a horrible game tomorrow. And I would tell him, like, that's great. You're gonna see faith in action. Keep telling yourself you'll get to see what your faith produces. So sometimes when you give weight to fear and you give weight to aspects that this is going to happen, it can produce things inside of you. You can feel like it's coming from God, but it's the fear that's driving it. I'm not saying that God wouldn't reveal things like that to you. He absolutely could, but you have to go back to discernment. Did this feel like it gave me hope and inspired me to want to pursue God? Or did this give me fear and drive me more into fear that my kid's going to die? Because anything that God speaks should come with hope, right? Anything that he speaks should come with love. Of course, there's filters in our hearts. There's things that can happen that we can not receive it the way that it's coming. But it should spur us to want to draw us to God if he's speaking to us. And if it's something that's pushing you away, then it's probably not him. So sometimes you'll want something to be true so bad that you'll dream about it. Oftentimes false dreams have a sense that they're coming from God, but they're coming from you. Common examples of that, I said, like marriage dreams. Lots of times I'll have things like that. Being extremely focused on something can cause you to dream about it. People that lay down extremely focused about work, you have dreams about work over and over and over again. It's just because you're so focused on work and it's eating up so much of your mind, you can't constantly dream about it. Those are dreams that you're generating yourself. Negative sources can be caused by the enemy. They'll stop you from walking in God's calling in your life. Fear dreams, dreams that can cause condemnation or confusion. You wake up from them feeling heavy and condemned. You'll just feel a lot of confusion around you. They could be coming from demonic places. Demonic activity could be happening in your dreams. Could be deception that's trying to come. It could be the dream that you had could have been deception. It could have been someone telling you, coming in that way and being deception. And someone asked me earlier about flushing dreams. Flushing dreams are interesting. They have a good purpose, but they sometimes feel like they come from a negative source. Let's say you go into a town, there's a spirit of greed in the town, and you go to sleep that night in that town and you have a dream about being extremely greedy. Or you just drive through the town or whatever, and you come home and you have a dream about like being extremely greedy. But when you wake up, you feel clean. Like you don't feel heavy. You don't feel all this confusion. You don't feel condemnation about it. It's probably that you were in a spiritual atmosphere and something stuck to you and you had a dream about it and the dream flushed it out of you. You could be in ministry moments and ministering very intensely to things and then go home and have a dream that you're dealing with the thing that you were just ministering intensely to someone about. And it's not that it's jumped on you or that you're now dealing with it or it's awoken this thing in your heart. It could just be literally flushing it off of you in your sleep. God's cleansing you. It's like stepping into a shower in your dream and you're seeing the thing that stuck to you, but it's getting flushed off of you. When we moved into our house that we're living in now, Lee woke up the first night we stayed there and she heard voices in the house, people talking. Same night, my mom heard voices in the house. And mom had a dream that she was walking through the house and there were all these people dressed in black sitting in the house. And she asked them what they were doing there. And she was getting ready to introduce herself. And they said, "Oh, we know who you are and we know who your son and his family are." And she said, "Well, why are you here?" And they said, "Oh, this is our house." I think it had to do with some of the people that were there previously and even in the neighborhood. Some things have been claimed over the house. Witches and warlocks can absolutely put themselves into dreams. That's definitely a negative source. There'll be weeks that I wake up and I'm just tired every day. I sleep fine. I sleep all the way through the night. I don't get woken up. No kids jumping on me in the middle of the night, nothing like that. And I'll wake up and I feel tired. Almost every time that happens, I'll interact with 2 to 3 people that week that are like, "Oh, you were in my dream last night." And I think my spirit's going out and doing stuff at night, interacting with people, and I'm waking up really tired. Yes, that can happen. There's people I know that have had dreams and they went to tell somebody. They're like, "Hey, you were in my dream last night. We were sitting in a coffee shop and we were talking about this, and this. And the person they're telling the dream to is like, "Oh, do you remember when we talked about this?" And they were both in the same dream at the same time, having the same conversation. Absolutely, stuff like that can happen. And there's sometimes that people show up in their dream. I show up in a lot of people's dreams because they have some idea that God's giving them revelation. And for them, I'm a picture of revelation for them. And so I show up in their dream because God's speaking something revelatory to them. And it's me in the dream because that's what I represent to them. And it could be you have a dream about Rick driving his truck one day and his truck breaks down because Rick's truck literally breaks down one day. And you saw it in a dream. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. You could literally see something like that in a dream. And it'd be literally the person you're seeing what's about to happen. So you can have mixed dreams that are coming from God. And there's sources that are trying to infiltrate the dreams. Something like you have a dream and you see these little green slimy frogs and they all keep telling you they want to come home with you. And then you turn around and look and you see dots of white light on the floor and you know that if you stand in them that you're going to be able to be cleansed from something. And so you feel drawn to go stand in the white dots. Usually mixed dreams when they come, they will leave you some kind of a choice like that. It'll present you with some kind of a choice or it'll present you with some kind of decision to make about which direction you're going to go. Mixed dreams are dreams that come and they contain elements from God. They could also contain elements from like a negative source. And there's some kind of a choice that's usually presented in the dream about what you're going to choose or what you're going to do in the dream.